Hi, I'm Amy Green. I'm president of Amy Green Environmental Consultants in Flemington, New Jersey. And our firm is head of the design build team responsible for the ecological restoration of what some people call the Kenco acquisition, but which is now the Pequest Wildlife Management Area, owned by the state of New Jersey.
The site existed as a turf farm, a lot of human alterations on the landscape. And when we see those types of sites and we say, okay, maybe we can take management of that, work with other partners, and put together a project that will increase the ecological value of the property. And so for this site, we brought it from the turf farm to a functioning wetland. And then we also, through some of the in-stream work that was done, we made trout habitat and other fish habitat in the stream. And now we see the opportunity to not only improve the habitat, but improve the access for people who want to appreciate wildlife, whether it's wildlife watching, and this site will create a lot of that opportunity, or whether it's fishing in the Pequest River, which is just to my right.
As a project sponsor, we received the funding from the New Jersey Wetland Mitigation Council and provide oversight of the project. This project is unique due to its size, and it's also the project partners and the landowner being New Jersey DEP. The project partner can then follow through and have this be a site that has recreational use at the end of the day, and it also is a site that is near and dear to the Pequest River, right close by, and allows for water quality benefits.
Why is this site such an ideal site for restoring wetlands? Well, it helps to understand the geologic history of this area. 17,000 years ago, there was a glacier where we're standing now. And what glaciers do when they move over the landscape is they're big bulldozers, and they just rip the surface of the earth, and they rip rocks off the top of the bedrock, and they carve out river valleys. So with very slight warming of the earth, the great glaciers gradually begin to recede. Well, they melt when they recede, and they start to drop all this load of sediment and rocks that they've carried with them. Before the glaciers, there must have been a river that we now call the Pequest River that went through the area and drained the area. But when the glacier dropped its load, it blocked up the flow of that river, basically creating a natural dam, and it created a big glacial lake in what we now call Great Meadows.
Once the glaciers receded, the Great Meadows ecosystem was a very large organic soil wetland, and starting in about the early 1900s, this site was extensively ditched and drained. There were a number of subsurface tile drains that were installed to facilitate the drainage of the property for agriculture. So when the property was abandoned, one of our goals to restore the wetlands here was to reverse all of the drainage improvements that had been made. With the assistance of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, we used ground-penetrating radar to map out some of the subsurface drains. All of the ditches were mapped and surveyed, and that gave us a template basically to try and reverse the agricultural drainage that had occurred here.
But technically, most of this farmland remained wetlands, remained lands that are periodically saturated by groundwater or flooded by surface waters. Our goal was to restore the natural hydrology of the site and establish native plants, to create habitat for wildlife, to restore the connection of the river to its floodplain, to put meanders back in the streams, then encourage the wildlife to return and create better habitat for aquatic life.
So the design for this project evolved over a long period of time, 2 years. And the initial design was based on all of the pre-construction data that we collected, both soils data, soils permeability data, hydrologic data in the Pequest River, in the ditches, in the tributaries, groundwater. And we went through several modifications. And every time we went through a modification, the engineers had to rerun all the hydrologic models, which is a requirement for the flood hazard area permit. And finally, we came, to the final design, which has been implemented. And so far everything looks good. And we've just had a very large rain event, and the site has stored a lot of that water, and there haven't been any off-site flooding issues as a result of this project.
And these are the engineering plans. And so basically these are the existing conditions. The stream, the tributary to the Pequest, this is the Pequest River. This is a tributary to the Pequest. As you can see, it's straight. So our project is essentially going to enhance this stream corridor by giving it some sinuosity, and then also creating a riparian zone, storage area, flood storage area, and riparian enhancement. Okay, so this is the detail of our floodplain bench. It's a typical detail, but basically you can see this line here is what the ground surface used to be, and there was an existing gravel road that ran along the top of the bank of the Pequest River. This is the river down here. So what we did is we graded this back, and this is the proposed elevation right now. So this area of the site will flood in the small floods, the 1 to 2 year floods, whereas before that water was just passed on downstream. Here's the stream corridor that we moved from along the railroad into the site. You can see it's got some sinuosity to it, and the floodplain bench. Here's the second stream that's been moved. It's no longer straight. And we also created some grassland bird habitat over here, plugged all these ditches. You can see the ditches are gone. There's still some depressions there that'll act as vernal habitat from time to time, but this is a project as it looks today. So it's been planted, it's been graded and seeded, and it's now stable.
So right now the Pequest is at a base flow elevation. The floodplain bench represents a 2-year flood elevation, and while the rest of the site is more along the lines of a 50-year flood elevation or a 100-year flood elevation. So in the lower storm events, the floodplain bench will provide storage that this project did not have previously, and will alleviate flooding downstream, down into the Pequest, down into the Delaware at some capacity. Some of the elements we did for in-stream stabilization is we added rock veins, we added log veins, we added root abutments, and we also added live stakes and stabilizing features along the banks to eventually create shading, lower water temperatures, and create more fish habitat. Early in the conceptual design phase, we took a look at all the habitat that was out here, and we kind of grouped it into how did we want to develop this project? New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife biologist Miriam Dunn, MIM, came up with a unique design aspect of really saving an early successional forest. Typically in restoration projects, we like to start with a clean slate and really design up because of the threat of invasive species and the threat of lack of success or grading projects. With this, we chose to preserve an area that had already had a significant amount of saplings and really bolster that area and replant that area to create an enhanced early successional forest. During the spring of 2018, the area was completely eradicated of all invasive species. And what that did was preserve all the good species, the native species, but also deterred all of the invasive species. During the course of the project and during the implementation of the project, we commonly refer to this 7 acres as MIM's Forest in honor of Miriam Dunn. I think 5 years from now when we're done with this project, it'll still be known as MIM's Forest.
So the history on this site is that it was drained and ditched to allow drainage to facilitate agricultural production. When the site stopped being an active sod farm, that's when the landowner sought the DEP for purchase, and then DEP wanted to create more ecological benefits for the area and to increase water quality.
And while it was being tilled and farmed, fertilizers were being applied. The site also receives runoff from adjoining agricultural land, which transports nutrients, fertilizers, both through surface runoff and through shallow groundwater into the site and then ultimately into the Pequest River, which is a trout stock fishery.
Okay, so oxygen is critical to the animals that live in the water, fish, and we call macroinvertebrates and crayfish and eels. And when you put too much nutrients into the water, it demands oxygen for decomposition, and it takes nitrogen away from the water, and it suffocates those aquatic life. And what happened in this Delaware River watershed, the accumulation of all that pollutants getting into the river, resulted in a dead zone right around near Philadelphia, where there was no oxygen in the water. And the fish that traditionally would, say, migrate up the Delaware River, like the shad, they couldn't even go through it because you can't go where you can't breathe. The Delaware River is water supply to 17 million people.
As a result of this wetland restoration project, a lot of that water is being trapped on site, and the vegetation that's been established on site will help to filter out the nutrients, filter out the sediment. Therefore, the water entering the Pequest is much cleaner.
So it's important to have good land management, but it's that critical location next to water bodies that makes the water quality function of wetlands so critical, the filtration out of the pollutants before they get into the waterways.
Because this project was part of a wetland mitigation project that got its funding through our wetland mitigation program, there's a 5-year monitoring component to it. So biologists from Amy Green and Associates will be doing that monitoring. So they'll be monitoring for both plants and wildlife. And the purpose there is to identify that the wetland restoration was successful. So we'll be looking for wetland-dependent plants, make sure that over the next 5 years, this property is functioning as a wetland.
So approximately 6 months, half a growing season after construction, here we are with full vegetation, already a certain type of habitat. We have our early successional wildflowers that are coming in, our black-eyed Susans, our grasses, our switchgrasses, our temporary grass mixes such as annual rye and winter rye, and also some of the designed wetland forbs such as square stem monkeyflower, which provides great pollinator habitat the first season. We'll get to looking around and there's monarch butterflies already breeding on site. And in future years, succession will take over and that species composition will change over time. But the one thing that we're hoping to create is an equilibrium of the hydrology and equilibrium of native habitat. The trees and shrubs will come along. Right now they're 4 to 5 foot tall, and in 10 years, this habitat should be creating a forested canopy.
The Kenko Ecological Restoration Project is such an exciting project. We've restored the wetland functions of 70 acres of land. It's back to what it wants to be. It wants to be a healthy wetland, teeming with wildlife, benefiting men and women by controlling floodwaters, improving water quality, providing a great place for people to come and enjoy, for people to birdwatch and hike and look at nature and hunt. So it's just exciting. And you can see after just one growing season or a part of a growing season, what we've done here. We've restored this land to what it wants to be.